Stars shimmered in the great velvet above, cold and countless, as if mocking the limits of one's perception. From a curved, silver observation deck on orbiting station Salus 9, Talek stared at Earth, blue, brimming with clouds and mystery. A third-cycle bioscholar from the Phyrexian Dominion, he had studied hundreds of species across spiral arms. None had left him so confused, so unsettled. And it had all begun with a question. Innocent, academic. Why do humans eat like that? He'd posed it to his mentor, Vriss, a venerable Phyrexian whose rings had long since hardened, marking an elder in his kind. The question had earned a pause, a slight twitch in Vriss's tail, then a single phrase whispered in hushed reverence. Observe, but do not presume to understand them. Not fully. Talek had not known what to make of that. Now, weeks later, he stood on Earth soil, well, mostly recycled concrete, inside a multidisciplinary university nestled on the Pacific Northwest coast. He wore a dermal shroud, disguised as human, appearing as a sharp-featured exchange student from Iceland. The cover had worked well enough. Humans, for all their famed curiosity, didn't pry when it came to foreigners. Odd, considering their history of suspicion. Another contradiction. His assigned research partner was a young woman named Julia Reyes, half biochemist, half chaotic storm. Dark curls always escaping a bun, shoes always tapping too fast, words always 2 beats ahead of her breath. The moment she met him, she had squinted, then smiled and declared, "You look like you hate small talk. Perfect. Let's get to work." He had admired that. She welcomed him into her lab. Cluttered in a way that would send a Phyrexian preservationist into convulsions. But every pile of notes, every half-assembled protein model, spoke of obsession, purpose. "You're lucky," she told him one night, unprompted, while flipping through a stained lab notebook. Studying human digestion is like spelunking a cave while someone's still carving it out. It changes. All the time. We invent new poisons, then we adapt. We eat stuff no living being should be able to break down, and somehow we survive it. Mostly. Talek had blinked. "You are proud of this?" She'd looked up. Hell yes. It's survival alchemy. He had not understood then. Not truly. But the weeks passed, and he watched. Humans ate things their own literature described as toxic, then joked about the experience. They consumed synthetic preservatives that outlasted metals. They ingested capsaicin, a known irritant, simply to feel alive. They ground beans into dust, boiled them, and drank the bitterness just to stay awake. Julia called it coffee. She offered him some. He declined. Still, it wasn't just what they consumed. It was how. He once found Julia crying quietly while hunched over a plate of pancakes in the campus diner. He'd approached hesitant. "Are you unwell?" She'd smiled through tears. "No, just tastes like Sunday mornings when my mom was still alive. Food and memory, biochemistry and grief. Somehow it was all tied together. Then came the incident. Their joint research had been making waves. An investigation into the unique adaptability of the human gut microbiome, especially in response to synthetic compounds. Their samples were unconventional. The review board had approved, but some found their work reckless. Among them was Professor Carthridge, a Grey Temple biologist who still referred to her as the diversity pick. Carthridge cornered them after a conference presentation. "You're misrepresenting the data," he'd said, voice laced with venom. "Pretending humans are special because they can survive on junk. That's not science. That's romantic nonsense." Julia had bristled. "We're not romanticizing. We're quantifying an anomaly you've been too lazy to examine." His eyes had narrowed. "You're playing with prestige science, girl, and dragging this exchange student into your mess." Talek had recorded every micro-expression. The flare in her nostrils, the way her hands clenched into the sleeves of her jacket. She hadn't spoken, not then. She just turned and walked out. But later that night, she'd emailed the board, copied their raw data, and submitted it to the Interstellar Bioethics Journal under both their names. When he asked why, she'd shrugged. Because I'm done waiting for permission. This matters. And if we're right, she had smiled, a tired smile that didn't reach her eyes, then maybe we prove humans aren't just surviving. Maybe we're adapting in ways no one's ever seen. That was the moment he knew she believed it. But belief was not understanding. Talik began testing his own hypotheses, requesting more invasive studies. Julia volunteered. Hell, I've done worse to myself for less noble reasons. She laughed. They drew blood, charted insulin responses, tracked microbial shifts. They introduced chemical elements that had devastated other species. Julia's body processed them with discomfort, but it processed them nonetheless. The data was irrefutable. And then she got sick. It started with tremors, then nausea, then a near collapse during a presentation. The test showed something unknown. An accumulation of synthetic emulsifiers interacted with an autoimmune disorder she hadn't known she had. He panicked, tried to stop the experiments. She refused. I agreed to this, she whispered from her hospital bed, tubes threading from her arms like vines. You want to know why we can eat everything? Why we have to? Because the world keeps feeding us garbage, literally, metaphorically, and we don't get to say no. We learn to swallow it, digest it, turn poison into fuel. He'd watched her drift into sleep, the beeping machines like a countdown. For the first time, he wondered if Vriss had been right. Some truths were too vast for Threxian reason. Days later, alone in her lab, Talik replayed old footage of war zones, famines, disasters. Everywhere, humans endured. They devoured moldy bread, roots, insects, things that would liquefy the organs of other sentients. Not out of preference, out of need. In one video, a child in a conflict zone bit into a rotten fruit, winced, and smiled anyway. He could not stop trembling. Was this adaptability or desperation? Evolution or trauma written into genomes? Then Julia returned, pale, thinner, but standing. She looked at the data he'd compiled and nodded. We're not built different, Talik. We became different because we had to. He asked softly, do you regret it? She met his eyes. I regret nothing. If you really want to understand humanity, don't study what we can eat. Study what we won't. That's where the line is. And then she walked past him, into the lab, back into the work, as if she had almost died to prove a point no one else seemed to care about. But Talik cared now, not because it was novel, not because it defied the data, because it whispered something he hadn't dared believe before, that perhaps the most extraordinary adaptation wasn't in the gut, but in the soul. And suddenly, he was no longer an observer. He was a witness. He opened a new entry in his logbook, his fingers shaking as he wrote. The human digestive system is not merely biochemical. It is the culmination of millennia of endurance. They consume not only for survival, but for remembrance, for rebellion, for meaning. I fear what they could become if ever they chose to weaponize that resilience. He paused, then added, or perhaps they already have. Outside, rain began to fall soft, steady. Julia looked up from her notes. You ever tried a hot dog? He blinked. That is not an actual canine, is it? She laughed, warm and raw and alive. Come on, alien boy. If you really want to understand humans, you got to learn how we eat our fears. And for the first time, he followed. The lab was quieter now, stripped of its previous urgency. Sunlight leaked through high windows, filtered by the fog that clung to Pacific coast like a secret. The scent of ethanol and burnt plastic still lingered in the air, a ghost of past experiments. Talek moved slowly, methodically, hands gloved and steady as he prepared another culture sample. He no longer asked Julia why. He only asked how. Her recovery had been uneven. One day she moved like a flame, fierce, impatient, burning through hypotheses. The next, she would sit for hours, back pressed against the far wall, eyes unfocused, speaking only when spoken to. But she was always present. That was what mattered. They no longer spoke of the incident directly. The illness, the chemical compounds, the ethics board's cold reprimand. But the aftermath hung between them, unspoken and unavoidable. The administration had paused their research pending an external review. Carthage smear campaign had gained traction. Funding stalled. Julia's name, once a rising star, had become a warning in academic circles. Unstable, reckless, compromised by ambition. Talek had offered to take the fall on the report. He wasn't technically human, after all. It might have granted her some clemency. She'd responded with a flat stare. Don't you dare. You're not my shield. You're my partner. Part of him still didn't understand the loyalty, but he respected it, respected her. In a way that unsettled the Phyrexian Council liaison he now communicated with only in coded messages. They had urged him to step back, to distance himself before human politics consumed him. But how could he, when he had finally begun to see? He watched Julia pour a thick orange liquid into a petri dish, hands shaking just enough to suggest a weakness still hadn't left her bones. Yet her voice was steady. This is the new strain. We cross-sequenced it with gut flora from nomadic communities, in extreme environments. No preservatives, no processed food, just raw biology. It fights back harder than the baseline. Talek scanned the readouts. You're trying to isolate the element of resistance. She nodded. Yeah, think of it like this. Every time humanity's been starved, poisoned, or fed synthetic sludge, our bodies learn something, and those lessons got passed on. We don't just digest. We remember. He stared at her. Memory without mind. Exactly. The phrase echoed in his skull. In Phyrexian science, memory was cognitive, deliberate. Biological systems retained patterns, sure, but they didn't remember in any real way. And yet, here was Julia, arguing that every crisis, every famine, had engraved itself into the microbiome of her species. He didn't have the language to refute it. Later that day, they received a letter. It came as a sterile email from the Interstellar Ethics and Xenobiological Oversight Committee. A brief paragraph, devoid of empathy. Your project has been terminated. Data will be archived for institutional review. Further experimentation on human biology by off-world personnel is hereby restricted under Clause 7F. Talek read it 3 times. Then again, he knew Clause 7F. It was invoked when a species was deemed too unstable to benefit from intimate study, or too dangerous to be understood without cost. He looked at Julia. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't say a word. Only when he reached for his pack to leave, protocol demanded immediate disengagement, did she speak. You're really going to walk away? He turned slowly. They've made it illegal. So, her eyes were fire again. Since when does legality stop truth? He felt a pull in his chest, something deeper than curiosity. If we continue, we will be exiled, both of us. I've already been exiled, she whispered. Academically, professionally, hell, even personally. You think anyone visits me anymore? Everyone who supported the project bailed as soon as it got hard. You were almost killed, Julia. She stepped forward. And you saw what I endured. You think that's just resilience? No, that's adaptation on a cellular level. I broke. Then I came back. Stronger. Different. She took a breath. If we stop now, they'll bury the data. You know they will. The Threxians don't want the truth about humans out there. No one does. Talek swallowed. Because it scares them. She nodded. Because it should. He had no answer for that. Not then. 2 nights later, they returned to the lab. Unofficially, illegally, Julia bypassed the security systems. Talek reconstructed their genetic models from corrupted backups. They sealed the doors, blocked the camera feeds, and worked in darkness, lit only by flickering terminal lights and the dim glow of bioluminescent cultures. They were no longer just studying digestion. They were mapping human history in flesh. Famine left scars in the microbiome. So did war. So did stress. Trauma wasn't just mental. It altered gene expression, altered the inner symbiosis between host and bacteria. In one sample, taken from a survivor of a collapsed agricultural region, they found a strain that could metabolize dioxins, a class of compounds fatal to most known life. Julia stared at the readout in silence. Talek whispered, "This should not be possible." She said nothing, just typed, adjusted parameters, fed the strain into a simulator. The simulation failed to kill it. Nothing worked. Maybe, she said slowly, maybe this is how humans survived the Anthropocene, not by fixing the world, but by becoming immune to it. He watched her then, not as a researcher, not as a subject, as something other, not superior, not perfect, just inevitable, a product of extinction events and desperation, of choosing survival over purity again and again until the line blurred between what was tolerable and what was simply endured. "You're not evolving," he murmured. "You're metabolizing catastrophe." She looked up, surprised, then grinned. "Now you're getting it." But as the days passed, he noticed something else. Julia's health was deteriorating again, not as dramatically as before, but steadily. She was pushing herself beyond limits, refusing rest, skipping meals. Her blood pressure fluctuated wildly. Her eyes showed the deep shadows of a system under siege. "Stop," he told her once. "You're burning out." She shook her head. "No, I'm burning through. There's a difference." The line chilled him. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday. Julia isolated a microbial enzyme that didn't exist in any database, an unknown catalyst that broke down synthetic polymers into digestible chains. She named it enderase. Talek reviewed the properties. "This could neutralize half the pollutants your species can't currently process." She nodded, trembling. "It's in us. Buried deep. We've been digesting our mistakes for centuries, and now we might finally do it deliberately." They sat in silence, the implications blooming like rot and resurrection all at once. Then the alarms went off. Security. Campus surveillance had detected unauthorized bioactivity in the sealed lab. Julia's face went pale. "We have 5 minutes," she whispered. "Maybe less." Talek stood. "We need to wipe the drives." "No." She moved faster than he thought possible, fingers dancing across the console. "I'm uploading it. All of it. To the Interstellar Archive Network. Public domains. Open source. Julia, they'll bury it if we don't. But if it's out there, someone else will pick it up. Someone who gives a damn." He hesitated, then helped her. By the time the pounding started at the door, the upload was 98% complete. She turned to him. "When they ask, don't lie. Tell them everything. Tell them what we found." He reached out. "You'll be punished." She grinned. "So what else is new?" The final progress bar hit 100%, and the screen went dark. The door burst open. But Julia was already smiling. Not defiant, not reckless, just unbreakable. And Talek understood, finally, why the Threxians were afraid. Because humanity wasn't merely surviving. It was digesting the apocalypse and turning it into fuel. The interrogation room smelled like bleach and stagnation. Its walls were the color of old teeth, dimly lit by a flickering strip of overhead light that buzzed like an irritated insect. Julia sat alone, wrists bound by polymer restraints, the kind designed for off-world use, flexible enough to adapt to various anatomies, but suffocatingly tight on human skin. Her pulse throbbed against a restraint edge with every heartbeat. They hadn't fed her in 12 hours. No water in 6. She counted every minute, every flicker in the lighting circuit, every metallic scrape of footfall behind the mirror wall. Psychological warfare. Textbook. She was exhausted, but not broken. Talek entered at last, flanked by 2 armed personnel. The guard stayed near the exit, rifles slung low but eyes alert. They looked human, but Julia recognized the synthetic precision in their posture. Enhanced soldiers, probably leased from one of the outer colonies, trained to suppress more than insurgents. Talek didn't look at her right away. He circled the table instead, reading from a digital slate. You are accused of violating interstellar bioethical protocol, disseminating classified genetic data, and initiating cross-species research without oversight. Julia leaned back, smirking. Don't forget defying institutional cowardice. That's my favorite one. He placed the slate down and finally met her gaze. His eyes were unreadable, but something beneath them was strained. Strained and afraid. You don't understand the magnitude of what you've done. I do, she replied evenly. That's why I did it. He glanced at the mirror wall, then lowered his voice. There's talk of designating your species as level 4 biohazardous. That means quarantine, no contact, no trade. You'll be cut off from the galactic network. Isolated. Julia's smile faded. And who's pushing that designation? The Threxian High Council, with growing support. She exhaled, slow and sharp. Of course they are. They're terrified. You all are. You saw what we can metabolize, what we can become. He sat opposite her. His voice was barely audible. You're not becoming. You already are. For a moment, silence settled between them. Not tension. Not hostility. Something closer to mourning. I tried to protect you, he said. I told them you were acting alone. I know. I thought it would buy time. Let the data circulate before they shut it down. But now they're calling for erasure, not just the research. You, she blinked. Erasure. They'll reclassify your genome, label you as a contaminant. Any species interacting with you risks the same designation. It's a death sentence in trade terms. Julia leaned forward, the shackles biting into her skin. They think we're a virus. No, he said. Worse. They think you're resistant to viruses, to entropy, to impose control. She laughed hollow. They always feared what they couldn't dominate. That's not new. He reached into his coat. The guard shifted but didn't interfere. From within the fabric, he produced a single transparent capsule. Inside was a soft golden fluid, thick, luminous, almost alive. Endurase, she whispered. He nodded. The only sample that wasn't purged. Julia stared at it. Her fingers twitched involuntarily. Why did you keep it? Because I believe in it. I believe in you. A lump rose in her throat, and she swallowed it before it turned into weakness. They'll never let it out, she said. No, but there may be alternatives. His voice shifted lower now, secretive. There's a facility, unregulated, on the edge of neutral territory. They specialize in bioweapons, most of them illegal. If we go there, we could replicate the enzyme, hide it in supply chains, not as a weapon, as a cure, a seed. She narrowed her eyes. You want to smuggle humanity's salvation. I want to give you a chance to fight the quarantine. From inside, she looked at the capsule again, then at him. Why are you doing this? You're Threxian. This goes against everything your people stand for. He hesitated. Then quietly, because I've seen what your people can endure, and it shames me. He stood, signaling the guards. One moved forward, unlocking her restraints. The other turned away, muttering into a calm. You're being transferred, Talek said, officially, to a high-security stasis facility for indefinite holding. Unofficially, will be intercepted en route. There's a ship waiting. She rubbed her wrists. This is treason, you know. I'm aware. And you're okay with that? His eyes burned. I'm not, but I'm more afraid of the alternative. 2 hours later, Julia stood inside the belly of a stolen cargo vessel. The metal was corroded in places, patched by hands that clearly valued speed over aesthetics. The pilot, a wiry woman with cybernetic eyes and a permanent sneer, didn't ask questions, just gestured toward the reinforced seat and flicked switches without ceremony. As the ship rose, Julia felt the gravitational shudder in her gut. It felt like rebirth. Talek sat beside her, silent, holding a sealed container cradled in his lap. Inside, multiple end-array samples, encrypted drive backups, genetic models, metadata from every corrupted simulation. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. As the earth receded beneath them, Julia turned to him. Do you ever think we're wrong? Talek didn't answer immediately. I think truth doesn't care if it's wanted. She nodded. Then we better make sure it's unstoppable. The journey was long and quiet. No lights, no signals, just the hum of engines and the occasional system's ping. Julia spent most of the time staring at her reflection in the observation glass, wondering what kind of enemy she had become. She had thought once that truth alone would change the system, that knowledge would break chains. But the system didn't fear truth. It feared resilience, that unkillable spark, the stubborn survival instinct that refused to be cataloged or controlled. The pilot brought them into orbit over a gray, crater-pocked world that barely qualified as habitable. The facility itself was embedded in a ravine, a sprawl of brutalist architecture carved directly into rock. No identifiers, no records. They were met by a tall man with skin like charred glass and a voice like sandpaper. He didn't introduce himself. Terms are simple, he told Julia. You give us something useful. We give you space, materials, and discretion. And if we fail, you won't. The lab was a skeleton of what she'd had at the university. But it was functional. And more importantly, it was free. Free of oversight, of doctrine, of fear. Here they could build. She worked like a woman possessed. Splicing, fermenting, cross-testing end-arrays variants. Talek cataloged everything, redesigned their models in alien code to avoid pattern recognition. They injected samples into microbial clouds destined for water purifiers, agricultural synth soil, low-tier food packets across dozens of systems. The goal was infection. It was inoculation. Let the enzyme take root in innocuous forms. Let it pass unnoticed like a whisper until it became foundation, until the systems that rejected humanity found themselves relying on something born from it. One night, deep in the 3rd month, Julia collapsed. Talek found her on the floor, blood in her mouth, eyes wide but unfocused. He called for medics, rough but competent. They stabilized her, ran scans, whispered the diagnosis in hushed tones. Organ fatigue, mitochondrial degradation, immune collapse. Her body was failing faster than expected. The irony was unbearable. She'd given her life to build the blueprint for human survival, only to discover her own systems were beyond saving. He sat beside her in the infirmary, hands clenched. You should have stopped, he said. She smiled weakly. I couldn't. Not until it was too late. But why? His voice cracked. Why you? Because no one else would, and because I could endure it. She touched his hand. Talek promised me, if they come for this, don't hide it. Don't bury it to protect me. Let it burn if it has to. Let it change everything. He nodded, tears he didn't understand gathering behind his eyes. She slept, then, peacefully, for the first time in weeks. And as he watched her fade beneath wires and soft beeping, he realized something unshakable. The central conflict wasn't between humans and aliens or researchers and institutions. It was between entropy and resistance, between inevitability and choice. And Julia? Julia had chosen to be the spark, even if it burned her alive. Lyra crouched beside the melted hull of a Sauric war skimmer, blood drying in the dust beneath her boots. Around her lay the silent aftermath of the ambush, charred armor, shredded flesh, weapons discarded mid-scream. The sun hung low, casting long shadows through the scorched field. Her lungs still burned from the sprint. 1 magazine left, 2 knives, and no illusions. She reached down and pressed her fingers to the carotid of the last Sauric warrior she'd felled. No pulse. Good. She couldn't afford any more loose ends. Across the field, the human boy whimpered beneath the protective curve of a wrecked transport chassis. Lyra rose and moved toward him, ignoring the ache in her side where plasma had kissed flesh. The child's eyes locked onto hers, wide, fearful, but conscious. Still human. You're safe, she said, her voice low, measured. Are you like them? He asked, voice trembling. Or like me? Lyra crouched and held out her hand. I'm worse. I'm the one they warned each other about. He didn't take her hand, but he didn't run either. Progress. She gave him a protein ration and a sip from her canteen. As he chewed, she surveyed the horizon. Movement 2 clicks south. Scouts, maybe drones. They wouldn't stop. Not now. Not after what she'd done at the drop site. The Sauric had called it purification. She called it slaughter. Villages leveled. Children executed. Families burned alive inside steel hovels while they hovered above and took notes. And she had warned them. You do not touch the young, she'd said into the translator mic before she'd wiped out the first patrol. You do not take our children. Not unless you want to see what we keep in the dark. They hadn't listened. They never did. The Sauric didn't believe in ghosts, but ghosts believed in them. She stood, eyes scanning the terrain. She'd need high ground soon. The boy was too small to keep pace, but she couldn't leave him. Not here. What's your name? She asked as she reloaded her sidearm. Danny. You got family left, Danny? My mom, his voice cracked. They took her. She told me to hide. Lyra's jaw clenched. Every time the same story. Every town. Every raid. They thought they could erase a people by targeting the future. She had tried mercy once. Left survivors with broken arms. Shattered pride. They came back stronger, crueler. No more mercy. She holstered her pistol and offered Danny a lift onto her back. We're going to find her, but you'll have to be quiet. Think you can do that? He nodded into her shoulder, gripping her tightly. Lyra moved into the forest, boots silent over cracked roots and dead leaves. Her mind ticked through tactical options. She'd need to hit the supply convoy rumored to pass near Ridgepoint in 3 hours. That would draw attention, maybe force the Sauric to recall their raiding squads. But first, she needed to send a message, one louder than fire. She activated her beacon briefly, just long enough for one encrypted burst to get through to anyone still listening. The signal was short. 2 words. Phase 2. If anyone from Black Dagger Unit was still alive, they'd understand. The forest grew thicker. Shapes twisted in the branches. Metal nests left by scout drones. She paused. The path ahead was mined. She saw the faint shimmer in the undergrowth. "They're close," she whispered. "Don't move." She set Danny down, wrapped his arms around a thick tree trunk, and handed him a knife small enough for his grip. "If something finds you before I get back, you fight. You fight like hell. You stab, scream, then run." He didn't cry. That meant something. Most kids couldn't hold the fear in. This one was different, or maybe just already broken. She stepped lightly, navigating perimeter. A shimmer on the left, camouflaged turret. That meant a perimeter guard was near. Sure enough, 30 meters ahead, 2 Sorek soldiers emerged from stealth, speaking in clipped binary tones. She noted their weapons, armor type, movement rhythms. Then she moved. She was in the first soldier's blind spot in 3 strides. Her knife slid under his chin, severing the speech box before he could scream. The second turned, plasma rifle raising, but Lyra used the first corpse as a shield, pushed forward, and drove both her blades into the alien's gut, then neck. Silent, efficient, tactical. She scanned for more. None. Good. She disabled the mines, then returned to Danny. He looked up with damp eyes. "Was that you killing them?" "Yes." "Good." Lyra didn't react, but part of her burned. Kids weren't supposed to understand vengeance, but war taught faster than school. They reached Ridgepoint's edge by sunset. Smoke curled from the town's remains. Another culling. She left Danny in a reinforced cellar with water and food, sealing the door behind him. Then she walked toward the center of the ruins, past smoldering craters and melted playgrounds. Her HUD flickered. Target acquired. The convoy was inbound. 5 haulers, 12 armed guards, 1 command unit. Perfect. She lay low beneath collapsed concrete, timing her moment. The lead vehicle passed her position. Then the second. She launched. An EMP burst disabled command unit instantly, frying their comms. She used a sonic scramble on the guards, disorienting their senses, then struck with feral precision, rounds bursting heads, blades slicing tendons, grenades tearing steel. It was over in 90 seconds. 1 guard crawled from the wreckage, helmet cracked, mandibles leaking blue. He looked up at her and hissed, "What are you?" She stepped on his throat, leaned down. "I'm the mother of what you tried to bury." She didn't wait for a response. Back at the cellar, Danny was waiting. She carried him to a nearby overlook and handed him a pair of Sorek binoculars. "Look." He did, and gasped. From here, the convoy wreckage was visible, burning, twisted, bodies splayed like discarded dolls. Above it all, hung from the command hauler, she'd left a message scorched into the hull. "You come for our young. We come for your world." Danny looked at her with something like awe. Did you really fight them all?" She nodded. "You're just one person." "I'm enough." The wind howled through the ruined trees. Somewhere in the distance, a Sorek hunter ship screamed overhead, searching. Danny tucked closer to her side. "Will they stop?" "No," she said, "but neither will I." Silence lingered. Then he asked, voice small, "Can I fight too? When I'm big?" She considered the question, considered what he'd seen, what he'd lost, what he could still become. "Yes," she said finally, "but only if you remember why." "Why?" "Because we don't kill for fun. We fight to protect, to make them afraid, to remind them they don't own the night." A soft beep on her wrist, motion, 10 clicks west. Reinforcements. She stood, slung her rifle, and lifted Danny again. Time to move. They disappeared into the darkness together. One woman carrying the weight of 100 ghosts, and one boy who might someday carry her fire. And behind them, the flames kept burning,